Hello, beautiful people. My name is Marika Gare, and this is the Inspiration Trilogy, a platform for women across the globe to share wisdom, advice, and just have some meaningful conversations. So today's guest is Catherine Evans, who's my tongue tied there, who is an embodied process practitioner, you've a previous social worker, and you're now a female coach. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Marika, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, look, it's great to have you here. I think you've got a lot to share with the world. So, but for those who may not have seen you across social media or what have you, would you like to give a bit of an introduction on your own life journey and how you got to where you are?
Sure. So I came into the world in a group of, a family of 5. And my next brother was 7 years older. And my dad told me at a very young age that I was a mistake. And so in my little mind, what that meant to me was I wasn't wanted. And so I carried that inside me as kind of a truth.
Mm,
And I can sit here and talk about that logically now, but at the time I didn't understand that I was doing that.
mm.
And so kind of what happened was there were lots of other things that were happening as well. My dad had chronic depression. My mum had an undiagnosed mystery disease, which turned out to be lymphoma cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up with almost absent parents, kind of. Not
Yeah.
totally absent, but absent in some respects.
Yeah.
And it was a household in which, and an era as well, where emotions weren't really kind of allowed.
Yeah. Yep.
And and we didn't even know what they were, to be honest.
Yep.
And so my mum and dad got married out of the war. Makes me sound really old, which I'm getting, definitely. And so they came into family life with scarcity as a big theme.
Yeah.
It was real, very real. And so a mixture of, not feeling wanted and scarcity and financial stresses on a farm where, everything depended on floods or drought or good weather.
And that's an isolating life too, right? So there's
Yes,
that element as well. Yeah.
yes, it was. So, and then boarding school at the age of 11, which was a big challenge for a young person who'd been
Yeah.
quite, isolated.
Yeah.
When all of those fears about not being, not belonging, not fitting in, not being good enough, they
Mm,
just came on full bore in a
yeah.
dormitory of 40 girls.
Wow. So were you quite shy and anxious then during those times
I
with
was
that big change?
yes, I was so shy. And
Mm,
on the back of those other experiences with what Dad had told me, etc.,
mm,
I really made that mean that they didn't want me because they'd put me in this boarding school. That wasn't the case at all. I
yeah.
mean, I don't know how they even got the money for it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But for me, that's just how it felt. And so there was, Gabor Mate, the amazing Gabor Mate. Have you heard of him? He's amazing.
No, I haven't actually, but I will be Googling him.
Yeah. So he's actually in Canada and he's in his 80s and he was a
Mm,
doctor, bit off track, but I'll come back.
yeah.
He was a doctor that was practicing medicine and seeing patients and realizing that they weren't actually getting better and
Mm.
he needed to know them as people. So he started to make these counseling appointments at the end of the day. And his interest and his specialization in trauma came from that place. So
Mm,
yeah, so he talks about big T's and little T's and their big traumas or little traumas, and
yeah.
both have an impact. And my experience in my childhood was the little traumas that still have
Mm.
an impact. Yeah. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Um, However, we were talking about my story. So fast forward to motherhood and met my husband, got married, 2 years later had a baby, moved across from Victoria to WA, so I had no network.
Yeah.
and really threw myself into motherhood because I wanted to parent differently. The gift of what my experience was that I knew for sure that I wanted to parent differently.
Yeah.
And I wanted my children to know that they were cherished,
Mm.
like treasured beyond anything else.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
and so I really immersed myself in motherhood. And it was a beautiful journey, a challenging journey. And I always say there is no personal or spiritual development program anywhere on the planet that matches motherhood.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's
Yeah.
immersion 101.
Yep.
Yeah. So motherhood kind of led me to fast forward 4 children. Hit 2016. My husband has a business, a renovation business, and the the stress of the financial times really hit us hard.
Yeah.
And so I got kind of
Just
thrown down.
excuse that phone in the background.
I can't even hear it. I got thrown into a spiral of extreme fear and anxiety. And I could not talk to him about it because he was in doing mode.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm just going to go to work and I'm just going to sort this out.
Yep.
And I was in fear mode. And I didn't realize until much later that that was an echo, a trauma echo from all
Mm.
of those years on the farm, living with the stress of, the common theme, which feels like pretty constantly was, we'll have to sell the farm.
Mm.
That echoes in my head, like, that just always waiting for this thing to happen where we wouldn't
Yeah.
have anywhere to live. Yeah.
And as a child, that would be quite frightening as well because your home is all you know. It's everything,
Like,
and you sort of that the thought of having that, losing that, and just being, yeah, I can imagine that's very traumatic.
and
Mm.
also I had a really deep spiritual connection to the land,
Yeah.
and maybe more so because I sort of became the only child,
Mm.
because my next brother was 7 years ahead. So he was off to boarding school, pretty quick when I was still there.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
really had that deep connection. So that made it even harder and
Mm.
feel more threatening. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm.
Wow, it's so interesting. And you've been through some incredible experience. I've also been, looking at your things on socials, and for those listening today, they can go and have a look as well. And you've talked about delving into, I guess, trauma healing and these trauma echoes, which is, I love the way that you explain that, because it really resonates with so many different people, and there's so many different aspects of our life where things can pop up, and that you get that extreme anxiety, and you don't necessarily trace it back to things from many years ago because that's long gone, and you think maybe past, but your body does hold on to that. So I wanted to delve a little bit into exploring trauma through the polyvagal and somatic lens that you talk about through your channel. So can you explain that a little bit more to people?
Sure. So, I mean, it's such an extensive topic. So I'm
Yeah,
just scratching the surface. I mean, I'm still studying and learning this topic because it just fascinates me.
yeah.
A gentleman called Stephen Porges developed this, I can't remember how many years ago, but it was looking at trauma through a different lens because I guess, the old way of looking at trauma kind of made its way through the medical lens, which is kind of there's something wrong with you and we need to treat it. It's
Mm,
an illness box.
yeah.
And Gabriel Marte and Peter Levine did this as well. But the polyvagal theory became more about the evolution of our nervous system and how it developed.
Mm,
And there are kind of three, they call it a ladder. It's very similar to the window of tolerance. I don't know if you've heard about that from Daniel Siegel, but this is just a little bit different because we have up the top ventral vagal. And at first I found these terms so difficult to remember because they're different to what we normally hear. But ventral vagal just means safe and connected.
Yeah.
You know, we're kind of feeling relaxed. We're able to engage with others. That's at the top of the ladder.
Mm.
And we're able to have, positive relationships and feel kind of, I guess, secure.
Yeah.
The next one down is sympathetic, which kind of relates to the sympathetic nervous system, which is our action part of our nervous system. So there's parasympathetic and sympathetic in simple terms. And parasympathetic sort of brings us down, and sympathetic puts us in fight or flight, whatever
Mm.
we need to survive, because the nervous system's all about survive and protect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's quite
So,
a primal thing. I mean, we're primal beings as well, right? So,
yeah. And when I first learned about polyvagal theory, I was working in mental health. I'll come back to the ladder. And I really loved it because these were people with some pretty, moderate, they were living in the community, but they needed a lot of support.
mm,
And I can remember this one gentleman that I worked with at that time, and I explained to him about the polyvagal ladder and how it works. And he just went, "Oh, so it's not my fault that I'm like this."
oh,
I said, "No, your nervous system is doing what it was set out to do, and
mm,
it fulfilled its purpose when those traumatic things happened, and
yeah,
now it's just stuck in that way of being that it doesn't know that, it's a different time now."
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's really interesting.
that was really empowering for him, because then he could start to, instead of being stuck in there's something wrong with me, he
Yeah.
could then move forward and go, okay, well, what am I going to do now?
Because you do, right? You're often saying, oh, there's, something happens or I'm not good enough, there's something wrong with me. And if you're very emotional or you're having trouble sort of mentally getting your head around it and processing it, it's like you've got something wrong with your emotional uh, well-being. Like you're not. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is I resonate exactly with what you're saying, and I think that's
Yeah.
yeah, it's very interesting.
I felt it too. Like you kind of
Mm,
feel that there's a deficiency or there's something missing or there's,
yeah,
well, actually, we're just human.
yeah, yeah.
In reality, that's what it is. And so the middle ladder is the sympathetic, which is the action, which gives us that ability to fight or flight. And then under that is freeze, where the risk is too great, so we shut down.
Mm,
And what I've noticed in my own life is that, and with clients as well, but that can be major, like, severe withdrawal, but it can also be micro.
mm,
Like I noticed last night, I was experiencing something and my husband tried to comfort me, and I needed to walk. Like I
yeah,
needed to walk it off. And that's that flight. Like I just need to move to
yeah,
process what's going on.
mm,
He wanted to comfort me, which was beautiful, but I felt myself, draw back, because I
yeah.
had this other response. I might just put my earphones in because I've just heard him come back. And he tends to be loud. So
Okay.
so the polyvagal lens, I guess, is looking, and Deb Dana is another person who's written a lot about this topic. And she's a therapist, so she translated it into working with people. He was more,
Mm,
Stephen Porges was more the researcher, the investigator. And Deb uses that window to help people see where they are, and also what they believe about the world and what they believe about themselves in each window. I think she calls them
mm,
windows in the ladder. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a really deep topic, but it's very
yeah. It is very interesting. I've never really heard it, I guess, explained in that way, but it makes so much sense. And I mean, our body reacts to everything. Like if we're under a lot of stress, our body can react and we get sick and things like that. So it makes sense that if a traumas have happened and it triggers something, that stays with us. And I find, look, because you help a lot of women, particularly in middle aged, you help other women as well, but particularly women, middle-aged and beyond. Because I guess there might be, because at that point of our lives, there are a lot of changes, whether it be because of motherhood or empty nest or perimenopause, but it brings up all these emotions that may not have been, I guess, tied off or dealt with. So what kind of process do you go with when women come to you? I mean, obviously it's quite a broad answer there, because, or broad question, because there's different, circumstances, different women, all that kind of thing. But what's the kind of process when someone comes to you on how they can to work through those things within themselves?
So through all of my learning, I came across embodied processing, I think a bit over a year ago, and just went, oh yes, this is me.
Yeah.
This is home. And the reason I loved it was because I've had counselling myself in stressful times, but it's all up here.
Yeah.
It's all about the thinking, and, it's all head brain. And while it sometimes, as you and I know, feels good to talk about things, because we like to download and we like to share and, have that exchange. However, it didn't really change what was happening inside of me enough for me to notice that I felt significantly better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was very fortunate to find a person that did somatic work, and I did some sessions with that person. It was amazing. It's a very different experience to work through the body, because what we're working with is this, not so much the intellectual explanation of what's happening, but sensing into the body. So, like, for example, women might come in and say, I had this time last night when I felt really anxious. And so we go, okay, well, what we do first is to establish safety in the body. So Deb Dana calls this safe enough, because when we experience trauma, sometimes we just don't feel safe again.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
not
I had a cut.
entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, not quite all the way there. So the term
Yeah.
safe enough kind of covers. It's not that, like, it's just more relatable.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the very first thing that we do, is establish that, so that if people are going into the somatic experience of their traumatic experience,
Yeah.
they can come back to safe enough place. It's not like you're diving into the pool and drowning,
Yeah. Yep.
The last thing we want is for people to be re-traumatized by talking about their trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, because it can trigger things again. And even if you sort of, bringing it up and talking to someone who's a professional, you're still processing it and bringing it up all over again. I find it interesting. I'm really good with mumbling my words today. I had a major car accident, I think it was 11 years ago now. So we hit a tree, we rolled the car. I ended up with quite a few injuries. I had brain trauma, and it took 3 years for me physically and mentally to get back to where I was. And obviously I got a lot of PTSD from that. But it's been 11 years, and I thought I'd done so much work on myself through that. But I find even now, because somebody else was driving at the time, I can't get in. I feel it's really hard for me to get in a car with someone else driving. And if I do, I'm like, I'm just like jerking like sometimes I even got to close my eyes. Like I can't. And I didn't think that I would still be like that after this amount of time, but because I don't get into other people's cars very often, but I've done it recently, and I'm still, it's still that. So like, it's interesting that you say, because you can recover from it and you get over it, but there's elements of it still there. And it just stays with you no matter how much you sort of, it's just, I guess, something that happens. So you do need to go through a different lens and different avenues, and try and work out how you can, I guess, really get rid of it for good, which is something I'd like to do with what I've just mentioned with you. because I think perhaps that's would be something that could work for me as well.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's not about getting rid of it either, because
Mm,
your nervous system is doing that for a reason. And
mm,
the reason is it wants to protect you.
yeah.
So it's more about, I know in the training they talked about, welcoming all the parts of ourself home.
Okay.
And I love that, because if we want to get rid of it, that's inside of us. That's a part of who we are now. And if we're pushing that away, that takes a lot of energy to push that
Mm,
away all the time. And
mm,
so when we meet it somatically, it's almost like we're saying, there is one part of the process that we can use where we can sense into that protective mechanism,
mm,
that the fear that comes with that. And alongside it, have, for example, that safe enough place, or so they're cohabiting together,
mm.
and it's quite difficult to explain, really.
But
But
it's just acknowledging it and yeah, working with it rather than getting rid of it. Yeah.
yeah, and the
Because I
other
don't I
part
don't
of
find my anxiety, I don't get it when I'm driving. I've been
yes,
perfectly fine.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah, and
Mm,
it's difficult when those feelings come up too, because sometimes it feels like they don't make sense.
yeah.
Yeah, and the other part of the embodied processing process is that what we're doing is we're expanding, we're not so much getting rid of something, but we're expanding the capacity of the person to have some tools and resources that can allow them to be with those difficult sensations, feelings, experiences,
Mm,
rather than pushing them away, being with them,
and
to
being okay.
expand that capacity of, yes, I'm feeling this panic at the moment, and knowing that it's part of something deeper.
Yeah.
And that, and as we work with the body in a somatic sense, then what kind of happens, or what I've come to explain it as, is the wisdom of the body. Like, bodies know how to heal. And
Mm,
when trauma's stored in the body, it still knows how to heal. And I love the sessions because they unfold quite naturally,
yeah.
following sensations rather than following an intellectual explanation of what happened, is
Mm,
a whole different level. It's a whole deeper level than what I feel. And I've worked with people, in the head up for a long time.
yeah. Yeah.
So working from the head down in the body it's so simple, and
Mm,
it's also very profound as well.
mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, look, I think you've got so much wisdom to share with everyone. And I love the way that you explain things and view things. It makes so much sense. And it's so different because even like you're saying, we're used to dealing with things sort of in our head. And even when we sort of deal with stress with meditation and things like that, which is something
Mm.
I'm very big on. And I find that helps a lot. But yeah, it's the body still holds that as well because we're one system, right? It's not this one or
Um,
that one. It's a whole sort of system of our bodies. So look, thank you so much for coming on the show. For anyone listening who wants to learn more about this and have some sessions with you and sort of experience that healing, what's the best way to reach out to you?
so you can just, on Facebook, I'm Catherine Evans,
Mm-hmm.
and my website is Mind Heart Soul Healing. So www.mindheartsoulhealing.au.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So that
That's
you
the
can
best way.
contact me. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So do you do because you're based down in Busselton, which is regional WA, so but do you do remote sessions as well via Zoom or what have you?
The majority of the sessions I do are on Zoom. I
Mm-hmm.
do I do kind of two things. Is it okay to explain that?
Yeah, of course. Yep.
So sometimes people want just embodied processing, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
And the other people, there's another group of people that come into my 3-month program. So we spend 5 sessions just for free so that they can get to know me and, to feel that we're a match, that it feels like it's resonating, because it's very hard to go into these kind
Mm.
of areas with someone that you don't feel like you resonate with.
Yeah. Yep.
And then they can come into the 12-week program, which really goes deeper into lots of aspects of coming from turmoil, which I kind of use to bunch all of those things together, like
Yeah.
trauma, anxiety, overwhelm, stress, distress,
Yep.
and come all the way back to a more embodied, authentic, empowered self. So that's the goal of that is the intention, and it is what the program brings.
And so what does the program involve? Is it sort of like weekly sessions, or
Yeah,
what does it involve exactly?
weekly sessions,
Mm-hmm.
and so we cover there's different topics in those modules,
Yeah.
and they get some resources and some audios as well that support them to practice the practices that I work with them on.
Yeah.
And the goal is to have those practices, which is incredibly simple. I work really to make them simple because we're all busy people.
Yeah.
and so it just helps support that person to embed them in their lifestyle, so that when they do need those resources, they're there. They're not learning them on the spot in the crisis. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
look, that's wonderful. Like I said, I think you've got a lot to offer everyone. So, for anyone out there who is interested in reaching out to Catherine, make sure you do through the Facebook pages. We'll be putting all the information in the bio. And yeah, make sure you reach out and see if it's the right fit for you. So, look, thank you once again for coming on the show. It's been lovely talking to you.
Lovely to talk to you, Marika. Thank you so much for the invitation and for having me here.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And I've loved our conversation. So, look, thank you. And for all the listeners out there, we'll be back again soon with more episodes. Bye.